Movie number one, Lisa Frankenstein. So this is my third time seeing this movie. Picked it for the opener of the month because it's a fun, easy crowd pleaser of a movie. I really like it. The way that I've been describing it is it's the movie that you remember Edward Scissorhands being if you haven't watched it in like more than 10 years, because it's got the pastel colored sort of suburban home situation going on and the very sort of normative Christian-y culture, and then you have one character who just doesn't quite fit in. Over time, the contradictions between what's expected of her and what she actually wants to do become so great that it causes conflict and death. But instead of being like, we need to cordon off the freaks and put them in their own little siloed worlds, it's actually about how it's actually super cool to leave your shitty conservative hometown and never think about them again, never look back, and not feel even a little bit guilty. I don't know. I really enjoy this movie. I really like how it's lit. I really like the set design. I think all the actors put in great performances. This is a script by Diablo Cody, directed by Zelda Williams, the daughter of Robin Williams. Just a really interesting sort of group of people working on this. Looking at it from the outside, you might see this movie as just sort of playing into kind of 80s revival nostalgia stuff, like Stranger Things territory. But the key difference for me is like, this isn't paying homage to that type of movie. It just is that type of movie. If you dropped Stranger Things as is into the 80s, it would not feel congruous with the media of the 80s. I don't think that's necessarily true of Lisa Frankenstein. I feel like if you dropped that into the 80s, it would feel like a natural part of the milieu of, I don't know, normie outsider cinema. In Stranger Things, main guy Will has a poster for John Carpenter's The Thing.
Maybe this is nitpicky, but like the kids in the basement, they're playing D&D and there's a John Carpenter's The Thing poster in the background. This show's set in 83, that movie came out in 82. It flopped horribly, it was a critical failure. No fucking kid in 83 is gonna have a Thing poster. Later there's an Evil Dead poster in the kid's bedroom. It's like no one had an Evil Dead poster. It just didn't happen. The directors put it in there because they like it.
I think about that quite a lot when I watch the sort of 80s revival type movies, is that like the things that we are nostalgic for from that time period that we look at as classics, a lot of them actually weren't seen that way at the time of their release. Like The Thing has been recuperated over time and now it's acknowledged as a classic. But when I grew up, it was just sort of like a movie that people thought was like weird and over the top. My dad hated it, but he liked old movies. So he preferred The Thing from Another World, which is the one that I watched when I was a kid. But in Lisa Frankenstein, the posters that she has in her room, besides being for like the bands of the moment, are The Mummy and 1930s creature features, sort of universal horror movies. And then of course she references G.W. Pabst. There's a lot of references to like Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein, naturally. There's a little Rocky Horror reference in there.
Damn it!
A lot of little references, but they don't generally feel like they're crammed in there. They sort of emerge naturally. Lisa is nostalgic for the stuff that her mom probably watched when she was young and that they probably caught on reruns together. She's like authentically identified with a subculture and a moment that existed long before her. And that feels like very realistic for her character. And that's a very subtle thing that gets missed in a lot of this type of movie. And it's just one of many reasons why I feel like it's a much better version of this kind of movie than even some of the classics. I don't think it's like perfect. I feel like it might be a little bit too long in the middle somewhere. It kind of gets lost. Everything about it is really working well except for the music. The needle drops are pretty good. I like the needle drops. I felt like the score really needed to be Danny Elfman or somebody trying to be Danny Elfman. I think that's the one thing that this was missing, to the point where I almost want to see a fan edit of this movie that's like maybe 5 minutes shorter and uses the score for Edward Scissorhands. I did have the thought watching it this time. So the monster is his corpse is revived by a lightning strike, missing 3 parts of his body, and over the course of the film, he gets those parts of the body back. He gets his ear from Lisa's evil stepmother, gets his hand from the boy that groped Lisa at a party, and then he gets his dick from her first crush. It's not like they're just random murders. They are specifically connected to very common traumatic experiences. She takes something from each of these people that's very symbolic. And it feels like sort of a reclamation as an adult Lisa would see somebody with that kind of earring and be like, oh, that reminds me of my stepmom. And I like how by removing these visual indicators of these sort of crossed boundaries and attaching them to somebody that she loves and then like re-energizing them so that they become part of his body. It's sort of like, well, now I don't associate with that ear and that earring with my awful stepmother. I associate it with this guy that treats me really well. Same goes for the hand. Now when he gropes me, he does it because I want him to. I just think it's interesting. It's a movie that, much like Jennifer's Body before it, came and went too fast and did not get the critical appraisal that I think it really deserves. It's a shame because Lisa Frankenstein is definitely a grower. Like I said, I watched it 3 times. I like it a little bit more every time I watch it. I really wish that her movies would stop bombing. I really wish that the people who finance her movies would stop advertising them in the worst ways imaginable. I want Jennifer's Body on the Criterion Collection. Yeah, so that's the first movie of the night. I give it 5 pumpkins out of 5. Am I doing a rating system for these? Let's see if I remember to do that. Maybe I'll do a different rating one every time. Movie number 2, Late Night with the Devil. I wasn't sure what I was going to think coming into this one because I've heard a lot of things about it. It is less good American Ghost Watch, which is ironically the movie that is sort of the centerpiece of this whole month-long marathon, where at the end of the month we watch Ghost Watch. So with this one, it's sort of controversial because it uses AI for just a few little intertitles and some graphic design, and so a lot of people were making a fuss about the use of AI because it's a slippery slope and we're letting it in, and if we accept it here, then who knows where it's going to come in next. And I see it. I sort of felt that whenever the news first came out, because you see the trailers for this movie and it looks kind of fun. I felt that outrage for a minute, but watching the movie, it's like 5 seconds of it. I mostly just feel like it's sort of silly because the production design overall is really good in this movie, and I don't quite know why they didn't just get somebody's nephew who is like, knows how to use InDesign and is really autistic about 1970s graphic design sensibilities to like do those interstitials. It's weird. It's a weird bit of corner cutting. This is a movie about a fake late night show in the 70s that had its last episode where the guy had a haunted girl come on the show and then spooky stuff happened. Just like in Ghost Watch, only this is, slightly worse than Ghost Watch. I liked this more than I was expecting to. David Dastmalchian is really good in this. All the actors put in really good performances. One of the most successful things about this film is that it really sticks to the bit. It presents itself as an entire episode of a shitsy late night comedy show. David Dastmalchian's character, Jack Elroy, whatever, wants to be the next Johnny Carson. And so the whole movie, minus a prologue that sort of gives the exposition and frames the history of the show and what this last episode represents historically. Besides that, and then some intermediary bits between commercial breaks, it's just presenting this full episode of a late night television show. I find that pretty admirable. I like that it stuck with a bit because it felt like one of those shows, by which I mean that it was awkwardly not funny and a little bit embarrassing and makes me wonder what my parents and their parents were on, that this was culture for them. They do the late night show, and then they have the bits that are like behind the scenes footage that has been recently unearthed, and that stuff is kind of The actual content of the behind the scenes bit is good, but the way that they film it is like they have 4 or 5 cameras that are doing like shot reverse shot stuff on these private conversations that are not supposed to be filmed. What are they filming on? This have to be like 16mm film cameras. The audio on that's gonna suck. There are lots of things that I feel like you can look at this and say, oh, this is a flaw, this is a flaw, this is a flaw, and I would give this like a 7 out of 10 at best. But I find that the way the flaws sort of communicate with each other is just frictive enough that it makes me go, This is a movie about selling out, selling your soul to the devil to be the next Johnny Carson, which is the most embarrassing thing you can sell your soul to the devil for. And I think the movie kind of knows it. Like the AI thing, I know that they did it to cut corners, but there is something about the sort of uncanniness of the AI interstitials that adds to the sense of like uncanniness and discomfort that pervades this movie, of like something's just off a little bit. I don't think that was the intent at all, but I think it does do something interesting. There's some really cheesy special effects. I actually liked the cheesy special effects. I thought they were kind of charming. I think the eternal demand for absolute photorealism is a blight on the ability of movie makers to do anything fun or interesting. I admired this movie for going in the direction that it did and trying to do what it was trying to do. I don't think it always succeeded. Like, it's not a great movie, but it's fine. I would put it at like above average. It's a movie that features a bunch of actors who have interesting faces, which is not something you see very often. It's a movie that's trying to be of an era without just relying on nostalgia. 80s nostalgia is sort of received nostalgia for a lot of people. I don't think that a lot of the key audience for this movie are going to be as like nostalgic for the 70s as a lot of movies right now. Their presumed audiences are nostalgic for the 80s. And I think that's evidenced in the fact that this movie opens with a prologue that very lengthily lays out the history of this late night show in context with like Johnny Carson. And I do think that that was a necessary prologue to have. Yeah, I just admire a lot of what this movie is trying to do. There's a couple of times where it does a split screen. It's not exactly a split screen. It's just two reels side by side. It's something that the William Greaves film Symbiopsychotaxiplasm does, but much bigger and weirder. That's a fantastic movie. Watch that instead of this. Watch that and watch this and watch Ghost Watch. There's no reason why it has to be one or the other. But it was charming. It got a lot of good laughs out of me. I would probably watch this movie again with the right crowd, you know, if some people hadn't seen it before and they're like, ooh, I heard that movie was really good. I'd be like, you know, I wouldn't say it's really good, but let's watch it, because I had a decent enough time, and David Dastmalchian is a lot of fun to watch. Yeah, it's solid 7 out of 10 cinema. I'll probably talk about it more when I talk about Ghost Watch later on in the month. Oh, did I say I give what's the equivalent of 7 out of 10 in pumpkins? I give this 3.5 pumpkins out of 5. What am I doing? This is fake. The Others, movie number 3, starring Nicole Kidman. This movie came out in 2001. A little bit of, I guess, inside baseball as far as the stream is concerned. We do a vote where we just put a bunch of movies on a list and we have everybody in the server vote on which ones they would like to see. And then this year, I took over duties for compiling which movies we watch. And since I knew that I would be making these videos, or this video, depending on how I release this, that I would be the one who ends up talking about these movies the most, probably. So that gives me executive right to decide which movies we want to watch. I put The Others on this list because I hadn't seen it in a really long time. I remember liking it, and I just felt the urge to rewatch it, and I thought it would make for a good addition to the stream. We did a trailer watch party, like a 2.5-hour stream where we just watched trailers for every single movie on the list and then voted together, which is itself a fun sort of marathon. The Others did not get a lot of votes, but I pressed my executive privilege and put this on the list anyway, because I was going through and looking how stacked the schedule was, and I was like, you know what we need? We need just a good old-fashioned traditional ghost story. And this isn't like that traditional because it has sort of a twist ending, but I still feel like that twist ending is in line with the spirit of the traditional ghost movie. We just got done watching it, and I was really, really pleasantly surprised by how much I liked this movie. It just recently got a Criterion release, or they announced a Criterion release, which surprised me because I remember when this movie came out, it was one of those where it had some buzz. Now, I was like 12 years old when this movie came out, so my memory is biased here. What I remember is it had some buzz, people like Nicole Kidman, but the broad consensus that I recall from adults was like, oh, it's boring. Nothing actually happens. It's too long. There's not even any blood or guts. And there's not even really any ghosts in the movie. And then it turns out, blah, blah, blah. It's just another Sixth Sense, but it's just dumber. I don't know. A lot of the adults in my life when I was 12 had pretty shitty movie opinions. This is a movie about a woman and her 2 kids in 1945 in a house in the English Islands. All the servants have disappeared and they've just brought on 3 new servants. The husband is off at the war and the kids have photosensitivity, so if they get exposed to sunlight, they die. So there's curtains all over the place and spooky proceedings occur. It's a ghost story. It's about a haunted, it's very Victorian, even though it's set in 1945. It's got a lot of Victorian sensibilities. They don't have electricity in the house because they lost it in the war and they got used to not having it. This movie has beautiful lighting, start to finish, which is always a plus in my book as the former lighting person. I really liked the camera work, lots of really smooth dollies, lots of good whip pans. There's a shot where Nicole Kidman's character is doing some embroidery and there's like sounds of people running around upstairs. There's like a dolly shot that goes through multiple stages where it like dollies in on her and then stops whenever there's noise running around upstairs. And she looks up and then waits for it to calm down, and then she looks back down, and then the camera dollies back in. The noises start again, camera stops, she looks up and she's consternated, noise stops again, she goes back to the embroidery, camera dollies in a third time, and then the noise reaches a fever pitch and something breaks and she's like, ugh. I can't remember exactly how that shot ends, but that was a really good one. I should just talk about what the movie's about. This movie is very hauntological. I guess if you want an hour and 40-minute long sort of ghost story that's very mood, there's not really jump scares. There's some like jump scare-y musical stings, but there's not really jump scares. This is a movie that's more about like the mood and tone and the hypocrisy of Christianity a little bit. The main character is a Catholic, and there's a lot of talk about the creation story and limbo and what ghosts are and what ghosts aren't. This film is very skeptical of Christian and Catholic notions of the afterlife. Everything we hear about it is from an authority figure who insists that she knows what she's talking about. But as the film goes on, all evidence suggests that she has no idea what she's talking about. She keeps coming up with excuses and sort of changes her story a couple of times, and it ultimately turns into a story about the stories we tell ourselves to not go completely mad at things that we don't understand. There's a line, I think, where Eloise Hawking from Lost says to one of the kids, "Your mother believes that because that's what she was taught." Spoilers for this movie, for the twist ending. It turns out that the family was the ghosts all along, but so also were the housekeepers. They died in like 1875. The ghosts that are haunting the house are in fact the new tenants that are in the house, presumably in the 50s, maybe the 60s. This movie always stuck with me because of the twist ending. It does something, it invites you to take on a different perspective of life and the afterlife, where our experience of the past and the future is not exactly, strictly momentary now. I like the idea of being haunted by the future or being stuck in a present that's past and being unable to allow for the passage of the future into the present. It ends with this sort of disquieting chant with the family saying, "This is our house, this is our house, this is our house. They cannot make us leave our house." And watching it again now, there is something here that feels resonant with the housing crisis and with the attitude of the surviving boomers who are in power at the risk of engaging in generational warfare here, where there is this attitude of like, this place is my place. This is mine, and it will stay mine after I'm gone, and it will have been mine before I even got here. The housekeepers that show up, they're ghosts from the past who died in 1875, more than half a century before the main characters died. But they see it as their house. They just can't give it up. They can't give it up, no matter what. It evinces an attitude that's like, the dead just will not die. They will not make way for a reality that's different than this one. And it is this just like this oppressive sense that the past and its greatness or its ascendancy is insurmountable and will not make room for you, which is very much how it feels to be alive in 2024. It just feels like we're already ghosts in this world before we even came into it, and we're going to continue to be ghosts after we're gone, and there isn't a place for us. There isn't a place for tomorrow's ghosts or the inconvenient ghosts of before. There's just this immense sense of demonic entitlement to the now and to all that was once its domain, that it can't acknowledge the existence of things that will follow it. These people that are in charge, I'm sorry that I'm making this political, of course I'm making it political, but the people in charge, they just cannot acknowledge that there are other ideas, there are other people and perspectives, and that tomorrow is something else, and that sooner or later, one way or another, their iron grip on all of this shit is gonna slip. These people are gonna die. Everybody's gonna die. Nothing lasts forever. But they refuse to acknowledge it, and in their refusal, they create a stagnant, oppressive now that is just crushing. And it feels sometimes like running around the halls of an old sort of Victorian mansion looking for where the fucking malfunction is. Where is the ghost? How do I get rid of this thing? I am the ghost. We're all the ghosts. We're all fucking stuck here. Christopher Eccleston is also in this movie. He's great. Christopher Eccleston, I'll watch him in anything. Anyway, how many pumpkins would I give this movie? I guess I am sticking with the pumpkin thing. I'm really regretting that. I hate rating movies. I think it's such a pointless exercise. If you look at my Letterboxd, it's totally incoherent. My rating system, I don't have one. I'll give like 5 stars to any movie that makes me feel good, and it's just totally like I am not disciplined. I do not put any thought into how I rate a movie. I would say I give this one a 5 pumpkin out of 5. 5 entire pumpkins for this bad boy. This is a good spooky movie. I enjoyed the heck out of it. Double feature. Did 2 movies this time. Movie number 1, The Pied Piper, an hour-long stop-motion film from Czechoslovakia in 1986, I think. It's the Pied Piper story. It's about a city full of rats, and the rats are a terror, and then the Pied Piper comes and he walks the rats into the ocean. But it's also about why you shouldn't try to underpay contract workers. It was a good movie. It was really stunning animation. Sort of found it through this new video imprint called Deaf Crocodile, which is focused on Eastern European film and like obscure animated stuff, which is really cool. I think last year we watched Faust by Jan Svankmajer, and I loved that. I loved that one. I sang its praises in last year's Halloween video. I would say that the animation here is on a similar level of Eastern European derangement. Just totally unlike anything you would ever see basically anywhere else. I don't know that I have much to say about the Pied Piper at this point, besides the fact that it was gorgeous and strange and off-putting. I think it's cool when the ruling class gets turned into rats and walked into the sea. I feel the temptation to make a sort of reductive reading of like, the thing that I wrote down here is, oh, the ruling class was the real rats all along. But that's not exactly how the film works. It takes a more totalistic view. It's a very biblical film in the sense that like there is a sin committed by the ruling class for which the entire town is punished. And the entire town does seem to be sort of a font of greed. It's interesting. It's interesting to think about. I'll definitely be rewatching it and reflecting on it, but very enjoyable, great animation. Second film we watched tonight, The Vourdalak, made in 2023, deliberately looks like it was shot in the 60s. It was shot on Super 16 film with lenses that must have had about 2 inches of Vaseline smeared on them.
Mais si jamais, ce dont Dieu vous garde, je revenais après ces 6 jours révolus, je vous ordonne d'oublier que j'étais votre père et de ne point me laisser entrer, car alors je ne serai plus qu'un maudit Vourdalak.
Qu'est-ce qu'un Vourdalak?
I have to imagine that somebody out there thinks that this movie is ugly. I loved it. I thought it was gorgeous. Very moody, builds up to its horror. It's got a French noble who winds up in this Eastern European village and stumbles into a family that is being sort of haunted by a vampiric demonic creature called the Vourdalak. The reason why I put these two films together is that I knew that the titular Vourdalak is a marionette, is a practical puppet.
Est-ce de moi que tu ris, petit?
Oui, grand-père, c'est drôle.
Yeah, the puppet is fantastic. It is very creepy and unsettling, and as my girlfriend said at one point, it has this sort of Kafkaesque quality where there is this just creeping, uncanny horror that is just totally obvious, but that nobody can acknowledge because the horror is occurring within the confines of an extremely patriarchal family unit. And the Vourdalak is essentially possessing the father of this family. It is a film that is about patriarchy, but not in the way that we would think of a film being about patriarchy at this exact moment in time, which is funny because this film did come out in 2023, but it doesn't feel like it. There's a trans woman in this movie. I think she plays a really important part in how this film, how you read this film's commentary on patriarchy, where there is this insistence on following the father's rule and never questioning it. You know, I don't know that I have a whole lot to say about this one either. I just liked the vibes, and I think that there's a lot of stuff to tease out of it from the perspective of the roles that each member of this family sort of play and how they're expected to behave. It is functionally a film about how the family unit in a patriarchal sense is a tool of social control and a means of closing off social mobility. There's the older woman character who made the mistake of sleeping with a guy once, however many years ago, and she can never leave this provincial village as a result. And the trans femme character can't dress the way that she wants to because that's sissy behavior, and that is unbecoming, and it can't be allowed. It feels like it's saying a lot of different things, not very loudly, but in this tone that I think it fits somewhat with the others. It's got a similar kind of side eye at a lot of conventional narratives about family. Top candidate for something that I might talk about more at length later on once I've had more time to process it. But yeah, I highly recommend this one if you're a fan of vampire-y folk horror, but you want a very different twist on a vampire story. Second double feature of the marathon, The Black Cat and Targets. Starting with The Black Cat. This is a 1930s pre-code horror film that features Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi. I had to remember the song. I didn't really know anything about it going in, besides that it sort of had a reputation. I was immediately enthralled when the opening credits say The Black Cat, suggested by a story from Edgar Allan Poe. I think more adaptations need to take notes from The Black Cat. Suggested by, not based on a true story, not based on the novel, but suggested by. That gives you enough wiggle room to be like, look, it's not really H.P. Lovecraft. Reanimator, suggested by a story by H.P. Lovecraft. Anyway, The Black Cat, what's it about? What is The Black Cat about? It's about an American white family who goes to Eastern Europe for a vacation, I guess, and they go to a town that is like graveyard from World War I, and they wind up with Bela Lugosi, who plays a mysterious doctor guy who managed to escape from the war, going to this modernist mansion owned and built by an architect that's played by Boris Karloff, who he believes killed his wife and daughter and also killed everybody in the town. Also, Bela Lugosi has a terrifying fear of black cats. And I guess Karloff says that if a black cat dies, then its spirit jumps into the nearest living thing. It's unclear, and it's basically irrelevant to the story. The black cat shows up on screen like 3 or 4 times. There is no haunting of the black cat. There is no relationship of the black cat to the story. There's some Satanism suddenly at the end. There really isn't a plot. There's like the suggestions of one. There's some interesting stuff with the World War I reality. There's material there to be read into, and I'm sure it's been written about. But it's a short movie. It's only a little over an hour long, I think. And it's mostly just an excuse to watch Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi be extremely catty ex-boyfriends to each other that want their own forms of revenge. It's just fun to watch them on screen. I would recommend this film just on the basis of it being a fun time if you're a fan of guys who exist only in horror movies. The Modernist Mansion is really cool and a very curious diversion from what feels like it should be like gothic horror, but instead of this, of like the typical what you would expect gothic mansion or like Victorian mansion, instead it is a fairly recent modernist building. That's not something you usually see, and the set is great. I'm not entirely sure where it lands on all of this or what all of these ingredients add up to. But it's a fun broth. I had a good time watching it. I guess that's my review of The Black Cat. I followed it up with Targets, which I talked about in a previous video, I believe. Targets also features Boris Karloff, and it is one of his last films, if not actually his last film. Boris Karloff plays Byron Orlock. He decides that he is retiring from horror movies and from movies in general because he feels like he's a dinosaur. People aren't afraid of painted monsters anymore. He points at a newspaper and is like, look, there's a headline about a guy who goes on a mass shooting. This is what people are afraid of now, not weird old men in mansions making eyes at young women. That's half of the film, is the screenwriter, who is played by Peter Bogdanovich, trying to convince Baron Orlock to come back to the movies to do this film, which the screenwriter believes is like a big break for him and very different from this kind of stuff that he's used to. The thing with this movie is it's a Roger Corman production. The way that it came about is that Bogdanovich had worked with Corman for a few years, and he decided to give Bogdanovich a feature to do of his own. Basically said, Boris Karloff owes me about a week of work. So write a script that can use Boris Karloff for that amount of time, and then fill it in with whatever you want, and you can make a picture. So he wrote a script where half of it is this screenwriter trying to convince Byron Orlock to come back to the movies. And then the other half is about a beautiful Aryan young boy living in the all-American suburbs of LA, who very quickly just decides to go on a killing spree.
A typical American family at dinner. Mom and Dad, their beautiful daughter-in-law, and their only son, Joe, a homicidal maniac.
It is about a mass shooter, this white young man who seems to be perfectly upright and nice and kind and everything that you want from a God-fearing American lad who joins the military. It's about the derangement that drives such a person to murdering not just his family, but he goes onto like an oil rig and shoots at a highway and kills a bunch of people, and then he goes to a drive-in theater where Byron Orlock is supposed to give an interview, basically. It's just sort of bouncing back and forth between these two plot lines, where the Boris Karloff stuff is pretty funny and sort of meditative on his career, and then the other half is just this tense nightmare of a suspense. You see this like seemingly hyper-competent young man, and over time he reveals himself to be extremely incompetent in a way that feels very well observed. Like, he drops guns, he leaves shit laying around, he's very sloppy, and he thinks he is methodical and well prepared, but he just barely gets by on this at the skin of his teeth. I think what really makes this movie is the ending. The whole thing sort of hinges on what the ending does, and I guess if you want to watch this film for yourself, you should watch this film for yourself. I think that it is shockingly relevant for a film that was made in 1968. I think this movie has a lot more to say about mass shooters in America than a bunch of movies made about mass shooters in America in the years since. And Again, 1968. This was way before Columbine. This was before mass shootings in America were considered like an epidemic. It's wild how easy this was to spot coming from a mile away. And it very clearly observes that a big part of where this phenomenon is coming from is the alienation of the suburbs and the ways that the expected working life of the nuclear family forces people to never talk about what's actually going on in their heads. Everything is very superficial, and allows someone who is mentally unwell to decay under the appearance of being well until they eventually give in to their darkest desires and reveal themselves to be a bit of a monster, and everyone goes, who could have seen this coming? But so the ending of this movie, to get into spoilers, he's at this drive-in theater doing a big shooting and a lot of people die and it's really upsetting. And then he drops all of his guns down in the screen because he's in the screen shooting out at the people in the drive-in. He drops all of his guns and all he's got left is a handgun. So he runs out, and Byron Orlock spies him from across the way and just walks up to him. And at the same moment on the screen, Byron Orlock's movie that's premiering is also playing. And so the shooter sees this famous horror movie icon walking towards him and then turns around and looks up at the screen and sees the same guy walking towards him in a similar manner. So he shoots at Byron Orlock and the bullet just sort of grazes his face. And then he turns around and he shoots at the movie screen and nothing happens. And then he keeps doing this until he runs out of bullets. And he reaches for another gun, but by that point, Byron Orlock has gotten up to him. And all he does is just slap this kid across the face a couple of times. And he just fucking crumbles.
Afraid of.
This movie is made by the ending, where this outmoded horror movie monster icon believes that the shooter is like the modern monster, and then he is confronted with this person in real life and discovers that he is not some maniacal plotting genius. He is not the kind of movie monster that he has played in so many movies. He's just some asshole who's gone on a power trip, who's totally pathetic and just folds under the first sign of conflict. The very first time when he doesn't have a gun in his hand and somebody puts up a bit of resistance, just slapping him across the face, he just crumbles. It is a boy who's never been told no once in his life, who walks through this world on a perfectly light cloud of privilege and ease because he plays the role of the perfectly upright American young man beautifully. And so everybody else is happy to let him be exactly who he is, even when he buys tons of bullets and guns. Because, well, you know, he's a nice upstanding young lad. He has a job, he worked in the military, he lives in the suburbs, and his family is so nice. He could never do anything like that. It really demonstrates how the people that we think are the threats in society and the people that we think are safe are not that at all. It's not clear cut. It's not black and white. That's why this movie works. It's awesome. It's unbelievable how prescient this film is. I highly, highly recommend this. And I think it is good to pair with another film that features Boris Karloff. I don't know if The Black Cat is necessarily the best one for that, but it does do the job, and because it's not a very long movie, it makes for a pretty good double feature, and I think The Black Cat is fun enough that it sort of fills up your fuel tank to be able to tolerate something where like this, which is very stressful and involves a lot of people dying. Yeah, it's good. It's a really interesting film. This is the second time I've watched it, and yeah, I think it's brilliant and definitely deserves to be in the canon of films that are absolutely essentially true about the psychosis of American culture. How many pumpkins? Did I stop doing the pumpkins? Am I still doing the pumpkins? I can't remember anymore. I would give Targets 5 out of 5 pumpkins, and I would give The Black Cat, I'd give it a solid pumpkin. You only need one, honestly. 5 is excessive. Like, What are you going to do with 5 pumpkins? Make 5 jack-o'-lanterns? Maybe if you live in the suburbs, that's fine. But like, let's be real. Most people, 1 or 2 pumpkins, that'll do it. That's a respectable number of pumpkins. Brotherhood of the Wolf. Doing a bit of catch up here. Brotherhood of the Wolf. I saw this when I was in high school, I'm pretty sure. I remember when this movie came out, my brother hated it. There's a bunch of movies that are lodged in my brain as movies that my brother hated because he had bad taste. He also hated Citizen Kane because it was boring. Anyway, Brotherhood of the Wolf, French film about some murders that are happening in the French countryside around sometime before the Revolution. These murders appear to be being committed by a werewolf or a beast of some sort. They call it the Beast, and the French king has sent a pair of ninjas to assist in the discovery of the beast, one of them being an indigenous American. They both have awesome kung fu powers, laboriously demonstrated with slow motion photography and over choreographed wire fight action scenes. It's like 2 different movies. On one hand, it is about the relationship the court has with the countryside and provincial areas. It's a period drama on one hand. And then the other hand, the other movie that it is a monster flick where a monster shows up and kills people in brutally over-the-top fashion. And also there are some guys who do kung fu really well. Those 2 things do not necessarily mix super well. There's also some weird racism going on in this movie. On the one hand, you have an indigenous American character that everybody except his partner is like really racist about. And a lot of racist attitudes of the French are on full display. And I fully believe that the film is being very critical of that stuff and is being like, look how awful these guys are for being super racist. But the counter that it has to those racisms is those people should respect the fact that indigenous Americans possess actual magic. The remedy to anti-indigenous racism is for us to embrace the fact that they have cool magic powers and commune with the spirits, and that is a beautiful and tragically lost way of life. Very funny remnant of colonial mindset, and by remnant I mean the entire mindset. Yeah, this movie inspired the video game Bloodborne. You see it at the very beginning with the costumes that the main guys show up in, very much the like tricorn hats and the big leather and the way they fight. A lot of their fight scenes feel very FromSoft in the way that it seems to be about like dodge rolls. There are moments where it feels like there are iframes involved. This aesthetic resemblance at the first half of the film becomes fully textual when you get to the end of the film and the main villain breaks out a bone sword that is a trick weapon where its main stance is just like a sword that he's swinging around, but it also has a second form where it turns into a chain whip. It's literally just a bloodborne weapon. So there's a lot of like colonial refuse that is the subject of this film that is trying to be progressive and sort of falling on its face because it also wants to be a cool action movie with Matrix-style fight scenes. There's fun stuff. I did like the action generally. I don't know if I recommend this film. If you want an examination of like just what was in the water in the 2000s in terms of outsider filmmakers trying to do sort of Hollywood style things, the awkwardness of integrating wire fu type action into historical drama or just into whatever genre film is being made. This is a very good example of that. I guess I would give it, how many pumpkins would I give this? I'd give it 1 pumpkin out of 5. It was all right. It was fun. I had a decent enough time. I don't know if I would ever want to watch it again. Whatever. It's a movie. It's fine. Watch it if you want to be mad at the French. Ganja Hess. This is a very radical departure from the previous night's movie. I don't know exactly what genre to put it in. It's an independent film from the 60s, funded by producers who were very new to the industry, and they gave the director pretty substantial freedom to do whatever he wanted. It's a black vampire movie about a guy who has money who is cursed with an addiction to blood. It is a film that is about the legacy of racism and colonialism. It's a weird film. It's a very artsy film that is doing a lot with very little. It's a very low budget movie, so it can't do a lot of things that you would expect from a vampire film. It's the type of thing where you watch it and then you're like, what exactly was that movie about? What the hell happened? And then you go and you read a summary and you're like, oh, that's what happened. Okay, now it's starting to click. I think it's a movie that definitely demands multiple viewings in the best possible way. I really liked it, even though I didn't quite know what to do with it. Great music. It inspired clipping.
By the Christians it is written that in the Black Meridian age. By the Christians it is written that in the Black Meridian age. There existed an addiction to blood among its people. There existed an addiction to blood.
Drink it up.
I can see why this film has the reputation it has as this like really unique star of early independent cinema that sort of just got buried. Like it fits into the genre of maybe along the lines of like the Francis Ford Coppola's post-studio films where he was trying to build up his own sort of auteurist studio and failed miserably. I could see it on the surface falling into the category of this is what happens when you give a director free rein to make whatever they want and what comes out is a sloppy mess. But I don't think it really fits into that category because it is a very intentional and well-directed film that is so low budget. I would argue that a lot of its scenes suffer from bad audio and maybe low quality film stock. But if you're willing to push past some of the amateur elements, I don't know if that's insulting to say, it is a really good movie. There's a lot to chew on there. I came out of Brotherhood of the Wolf not knowing what to make of it in sort of a derogatory way, where I was like, I don't know if I want to look too much deeper into this because it has such a weird attitude about the French Revolution and kind of seems to think that revolutionaries were bad actually, which is just hilarious. Whereas I came out of Ganja Hess not knowing what to make of it from the perspective of this is a dense and very culturally specific film that I feel would benefit from reading up on not just, what happened or not just on the production history, but on the critical writing that's been done in the years since its release. It feels like the kind of movie that lives in your head and grows in esteem as time goes on, and then you come back to it and you're like, oh, I get it now. Oh my God, this is one of the best movies ever made. So I'm excited to rewatch it. I would give this one... Fuck it, I give this one 5 pumpkins out of 5. Great, interesting, weird, bizarre, beautiful vampire movie. Totally unlike any other vampire movie you'll ever see, in a way that is very uniquely different from how I would describe like a vampire movie that does a different twist on the vampires. It's the vampire story, but there's one rule that's different. This isn't like that. This is like philosophically, ideologically, extremely divorced from the vampire movie as such. And that's awesome to me. The Visitor. What the hell do I say about The Visitor?
I can't explain it, Raymond.
It's a very... It's a bit like Age of Aquarius, The Omen. It's got an alien Jesus at the beginning with a bunch of bald children in white robes that he's sort of preaching to about space wizards. Sort of discount Dianetics. Then they find out that there's another psychic kid who's emerging on Earth, and they send a guy to go down there to take care of her, I guess, and basically bring her back to wherever this space wizard cult lives. The kid herself has like psychic powers and she is just unabashedly evil. She makes this movie. She 100% makes this movie because her performance is just so fantastic. I said this to somebody when we were watching it, that if the little girl in Psycho Gorman had been played by the little girl in The Visitor, I probably would have loved Psycho Gorman about 10 times as much as I actually did. She's a lot of fun in this. There's a little bird that she has who's a big asshole. This is one of those, like, it's a 70s movie where you just kind of let it happen to you. It has a lot of really fun, weird kills and idiosyncrasies. There's like a discount Columbo. You just sort of enjoy the experience of watching something that could only emerge from the world of crystals and cocaine. You just sort of thank the good Lord that something like this could possibly come to exist in this stupid reality where people insist on making good movies that you understand all the time. Sometimes we need a little chaos. It was fun, it was weird, there were some cool lighting gimmicks. God, I don't know what to say. 3 pumpkins out of 5. It was better than nothing. The Omen, classic haunted kid movie about a kid who is haunted. He is the Antichrist. He is born of a jackal. His name is Damien. His dad is a diplomat, and he's gonna grow up and become the Antichrist and do Antichrist things. This is the haunted child movie. I saw this when I was a teenager and I haven't watched it since. I remember being kind of bored by it, and I don't understand how I was bored by it now. It hit me this time how much this is very clearly trashy The Exorcist. Like, William Friedkin did The Exorcist, and it is this slow character drama about a single mother who is slowly driven to the brink of madness by the inexplicable nature of what's happening to her daughter until she is pushed out of desperation to Catholic priests to do an exorcism. The deaths that happen in that film are like extreme, but they're built up to very slowly. And it was like, you know, the scariest movie ever made because it broke away from the sort of high camp type of Boris Karloff horror of like the Universal stuff and Hammer stuff. It's trying to take a more realist approach to horror. So the creators of The Omen saw that and said, okay, that's cool. What if we got rid of all the subtlety and just made it about how awesome it is when the Antichrist cuts a dude's head off with a giant piece of plexiglass? The kills in this are viscerally really upsetting and awesome in a way that I forgot and sort of wasn't expecting. There's a lot of movies from that era that there is still this like remnant of their reputation as like the scariest movies of all time. And you look back at them now and they just seem quaint. The Exorcist seems quaint now. I feel like you do have to get into the mindset of the time a little bit and remind yourself like, never had we seen anything like this. It's sort of like watching The Godfather. You go, if you have never seen The Godfather before, you go and watch The Godfather and you realize you have watched The Godfather because every other movie is The Godfather. It's the same with The Exorcist. So The Omen, I sort of assumed that the kills would not have aged very well, but they're awesome. They're great. It's all for you, Damien. That bit came way sooner than I was expecting in this movie.
Look at me, Damien. It's all for you.
The sort of Catholic doctrine on display in this movie sure is something. It's definitely in the doomsday cult, presages the Left Behind style by a good couple of decades. It's part of this current of like, we should be skeptical of the notion that this stuff isn't real. There's a bit sort of right before the third act where I was starting to feel like it was getting a little bit long in the tooth, because there is a lengthy section where they're investigating whether or not Damien is actually the Antichrist. And we know that he's the Antichrist because we're watching the movie. And so the process of the dad and the photographer investigating whether or not he is the Antichrist gets a little bit tedious because it's like a little bit late to the party here. But there is a sequence where they get to what is a soundstage location in a graveyard. It's supposed to be an Etruscan graveyard. And it was really cool watching that scene progress. There's some dogs that show up that chase them around. Seeing this location that's made to look like a real place that's in a soundstage, and how it's been designed to accommodate the action set piece that is the conclusion of this sequence. Yeah, there's just good stuff like that just as a fan of film craft, I enjoy catching those things. There's a lot of times in movies where they will use a location and just try to make it work, especially at this era. That kind of thing, when you only have so much film stock to work with, can really be disastrous for an outdoor, like moody nighttime sequence. So they built this location in a soundstage where they could control the lighting and the wind and the atmosphere, and it results in a really good bit of filmcraft. Also, Patrick Troughton is in this movie, the second Doctor. He's the priest. He does a great job. It's awesome. I like to think that this was the sequence of events that led to the second Doctor's regeneration, because he does sort of act like the doctor. He is a guy who just sort of shows up and is like, hey, your kid is the Antichrist. You need to do something about it. And the dad is like, what the fuck are you talking about? Who are you? There's some really good acting in this movie, or at least good character actors having a good time. Yeah, I enjoy The Exorcist. I would give it a 4 pumpkin out of 5. It was good. It holds up to its own reputation. The Israel stuff hasn't aged super well, but there you go. What has?